All right, hi there. This is Mrs. Perviti, and we are about to take our quiz 1.3 to 1.5. So I want to make sure you have your notes out. We did our review, and as you recall, it is for these sections. So it should look like this. You want to have this out so you can compare similar problems as you go through this. You can also have out your regular learning target sheets. Those are also a good thing to have out. So let's start with our first section, 1.3. So I'm going to be looking at that on my review as I go through this quiz. So you should be looking at it too. So function composition. So as you recall with function composition, here is our first one. It gives you a function here. That's our f of x, and here is our g of x. So it's that whole entire thing. So it's asking us for this first one, as you recall, you take this number and you put it in the inner one, or the first one you see. So you use this function. Anywhere you see x, you're going to plug that in, and then you get a new answer, and then you go to f. So you write that one out, and instead of x, whatever your new answer is, you are going to plug in. For number 2, it's written differently, but it could actually be written this way as well. This is the inner, so you take this number and you plug it into f first, and you get a new number. And then your new number you take and you plug it into g, and you get the final answer. Okay, let's go to 3 and 4. These are a little bit different because there's no numbers in here, so we're going to be plugging one function into another. So we look at, again, f of x is this one. They've changed it this time, and we have g is this one. So the first one is asking us to take our inner function, which is f of x, and you plug it into where you see the g. So you start with you just write out whatever g is, and then where you see the x, you plug in the whole entire function. Okay, for number 4, this is a little bit different, but your first function is you're plugging the same function into itself. So g of x will go into g. So when you write out g, anywhere you see the x, you also have to write g again, and then you'll have to look for distributive, combined like terms, that kind of thing. All right, let's go to the tables 5 and 6. When you have a table, so this one, again, it's the same thing where we look at doing the inner part first and then the outer. So the first thing we do, remember for these, is you have to look at where g of x is -1. So you go to your g and you find when x is -1, what's across from it. And then you have to take that number as your new x, and you then go to your outer, or your f, and that new number you pretend is your x, and you look at where it is and what's across from it, and then it gives you a final answer. So that's what you do for both of these. So you start with, right, your inner, pretending it's x, seeing what it is, and then plugging it into the outer, or the second function. Same thing. So this is your first one. Pretend that 0 is x on the f, and then you find a new number. You find that f of x, whatever the y is, that's what we call it, and then you plug it into the g and as an x, and then you see what is across from it. All right, so the last part of 1.3, looking at this, we have our graphs. So we have to find the composite function when it gives us two of them up here. So this is our f of x, where y equals, and the y equals h of x. So this is where you draw the lines in. So as you recall, it's the bottom part for the last two on our review, 18 and 19. So when you look at, just for example, 18, it gave us the first function and we had to look at h of 3. So what we're doing is, remember, we're pretending that's our x. So we have to go on the x-axis and we end up drawing the vertical line. And I draw it at where h is 3, and then I make sure to see where it hits the h graph that's labeled, and I follow it across to find out where that number lies on the y-axis, and I get my new number. And then I still have to go to g, my outer one, but now I'm pretending my g of x, I use my new number, and I plug that in. And again, I just go on the x-axis, I draw my vertical line, and then because it's the g, I have to look at the g graph, and I just follow it across to see where it hits. Okay, so that's what you're going to do on your quiz. Oops. For 7 and 8. It's the same thing as on your review. All right, so we should now be at our learning target 1.4, inverse functions. So as you recall with inverse functions, there's a couple things. Inverse functions are just, there was a couple rules. First, we need to make sure with inverse functions that we are changing our f of x or g of x or whatever it is to a y, and then we switch the x and the y. So then now it becomes, for this one, x equals, and then where you see that, you plug in the y. So then we end up having to solve, and we get either a new simplified function, just reduced down, and how we write it is f to the negative first of x, and then you write your new function. Okay, so that's the first two of these. So you have to follow those rules. So I want you to go ahead and do that. The answer actually shows you how to write it out. So you're just going to follow those rules. All right, let's flip the page over, and we have now the ones where we have a graph. So if you look at learning target 1.4, our graph ones are actually on the back of our review for 32 and 33. Okay, so what we end up having to do is for this one, it's actually a little bit more simple because it's asking you, this one is just asking you, give two ordered pairs that would be on the inverse of this function. So first, you want to find the inverse of this function. Okay, and we know how to go ahead and solve for and find the inverse of the function. And then you're going to put it on the graph. And then you're just going to look at yours and find two ordered pairs on there. Another way could just be, well, first of all, to find the inverse of this function, again, you're just rearranging it. You're finding the inverse function. But then you can actually use your y equals key to put in the inverse function and then hit the second and table, and it will come up with ordered pairs. So you could do it either way. So now we are at 12, which it gives us a table. And then it says here we need to determine whether the statement is either true or false. So this is the actual function. So you might, on the side, you might want to write the inverse ordered pairs, or you can read the questions and do them as you go. So this would just true or false, an ordered pair on the inverse function. So remember, you first have to find the ordered pairs that are on the inverse. We know how to do that. We just switch the x and the y. Remember, this is kind of like the y. Would be 1, 1. So then you would look at that and see, is that true or false? Okay, again, inverse function, would it be 7, 1? So remember, with the inverse functions, when we do that, this was 30 and 31 on our review. I wrote out to the side here the inverse function. You just flip the x and the y. We're not changing negatives and positives. You're just flipping the two, x and y. So they just became their opposites. So then I was able to answer questions about the inverse because I could look at these ordered pairs. So that's a good strategy to answer these two questions. All right, so the last part, we're going to get out our Learning Target 1.5. That is on the bottom of our review, and it's very similar to our review. So the first part is we're going to list the coordinates of the points after the translations provided. So if you remember on our review, we always, if we are talking over here to the side, I had you guys write, if you go right, you're doing something to your x coordinate, either adding or subtracting. So right means you add, left means you subtract. When you're going up or down, you do either adding if you go up to your y coordinate and subtraction if you go down to your y coordinate. So remember this first one, it's written the correct way. So right means I add to my x coordinate. So I just take my coordinate and I do +6, my x +6, and then it's a down to. Now remember, if we go down, we subtract. So I just took my y -2. Okay, and then I just used this ordered pair and I plugged it in and found my new ordered pair. Okay, there was only a tricky one when they do the up or down first. This was one that was a little bit different because we need to make sure we understand we're not necessarily always doing our x first or our y. The right or left gets done to the x coordinate. The up or down gets done to the y coordinate. So just be careful of that. If it doesn't give it to you in order, you need to make sure you're doing the right operation. Okay, so this one's just saying left and then up, right and then down, left and then down. Okay, so this one actually didn't have any tricky ones on it, so go ahead and do those. All right, here we go here for 16. Now remember, there's a couple different ways to do it. My way, how I do it is I write the ordered pairs from the graph. And then what I do is I figure out from the sentence in here what I'm going to do to everything. So remember, we're talking about, it says here, translate the graph 2 units down. This can be tricky, even though that comes first. Remember, up or down is your y coordinate. So you're going to have to take y, whatever your y coordinates are, and subtract 2. So I'm giving you a little hint there. Okay. Now, then you also have to go 3 units right. We know that right or left means you do it to your x coordinates. So then we have x plus 3 because we're going right, so we're adding. And then what we do after that, it says you then reflect the graph over the x. Now remember, when you reflect over the x, just kind of sneak this down here. Once you first have to do to your new coordinates, you then have to make y, I'll put y coordinate or new y coordinate, its opposite. This means if it's positive, it becomes negative. If it's negative, it becomes positive. Okay, so this is the last move. So I look at all my ordered pairs. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember, I wrote them out, and then I do these things. I make sure to add 3 to all the x's, subtract 2 from all the y's, and then the last part is you go to reflect it in the x, or over the x, or about the x. You have to then take your new y's, and they become their opposite. And then I like to rewrite the coordinates out. You don't have to. And then you plot them. So that's what I did here. Remember on my example, here was my original coordinates. I just wrote them out. And then I did what it said. I added 1 to all my x's, so I got new x's. I subtracted, and I got all new y's. And then what I did was, in my y's, I then made them opposites with this orange over here. So then I rewrote my ordered pairs. So this was my new x after I added, so I just rewrote my ordered pairs over here on the side, and I plotted them. So that's how I do it. Okay? All right, and then the last 2. So these are very similar to 39, 40, 41. So remember, this is going to ask you for the parent function, which is pretty simple because we can look at our note sheet for 1.5. Sometimes we already just know this. And then we have to look in our little chart. So this is a little bit different in our chart to describe the transformation. Now, as you recall, I like to use the chart, the bigger chart that I gave you for the note sheets for 1.5, that it's on the bottom of your 1.5 here, this chart here. So if it's on the outside, so just zooming in real quick, remember you can have this chart or the bigger chart that I give out too. If it's on the outside, not in any parentheses, that means we go up, we're going up 1, or whatever the number is, C. If it's outside the parentheses and it says minus, that means we go down. And then if it's in parentheses, and then I also like to put, if there's a little 2 on the outside, or if it's to the 3rd power, that always just stays on the outside. It doesn't matter. Sometimes there's nothing. But if it's inside the parentheses, if you add a number, that means you go horizontal. You're going left or right. And then if it's inside the parentheses, if you subtract a number, that means you go right. And then we have, if there's a negative on the outside, that's reflecting in the x. We know that one pretty well. And then over here, the last one, I always put, if there's a whole number, it's a stretch. If it's a fraction, so I'll just put 1 over a, that means we shrink it, or we use the word compress. Okay, so this is a good chart to look at. You can also look at any of the other charts. Okay, so we're going to look at, on the quiz, I'm going to look at the examples, and I'm going to make sure to have my chart out because it's super helpful. Okay, so this one is just saying, what's the parent function? So you know what you're looking for. You're looking for something key to tell you the parent function, and then you copy its form. And then the transformation. So I'll just give you a little bit of a hint. So we have inside the parenthesis a +4. That would be your first move you're going to describe down here. And then on the outside, no parenthesis, is a -7. So that's what you're looking for. So there's 2 moves you're going to have to describe. All right, and now let's look at 18. So that is the one just like our very last one, 42, on our study guide, where we described, we have to look at, I just take one of the points, and it wants to know what would be the parent function. It's giving us the transformation. So we basically have to look at, okay, I like to go right or left first, and then we know that's going to be in the parenthesis. So how many did I go over, and how many did I go up? Did I reflect? So you got to look at some of the things in the chart for this. Okay, so we know right away, just looking, we have the very front of our note sheets for 1.5. We can tell what kind of function that is by looking at the picture. So you're going to just write the parent function. And then the transformation, you're going to describe it. So again, just make sure you're taking 1 point and describing what you're doing. So I would start with probably this point and then describing what you're doing. That's going to, you'll go in the chart and you'll write your function. So for this one here, remember if it's very similar. We have the parabola, so we know it's a quadratic. So we know we have this little 2 on the outside. So then we have to think about how many left or right, how many up or down, and then we'll write something. You should get something new that's kind of similar to this, but different numbers. All right, so that is the end of our quiz.